Imagine trying to heal a shattered bone by just taking a handful of painkillers and refusing to put a cast on it.
Right. Just completely ignoring the structural damage.
Exactly. I mean, if you feel okay, you're walking around.
Yeah.
But beneath the surface, that bone is healing crooked, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to mess up your line for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely will.
Today on this Scars Institute Exploration podcast, we're looking at why so many scam survivors do exactly this with their emotional recovery. And before we go any further, if you're listening to this right now as a survivor, we need you to hear this loud and clear.
Yes, very clearly.
What happened was not your fault. The criminals are the sole architects of these deceptions, and you are not alone. The Scars Institute is here to help.
Absolutely. And, that structural healing you just mentioned, that's exactly what we're focusing on today. We're getting into the mechanics of why recovery stalls, and more importantly, how to get it moving again.
Right.
And we're playing this completely straight today. No hype, just the compassionate truth.
Yeah, that's the goal. And our map for this conversation is the Scars Institute Guide on the Scars Institute Scams Now magazine. This is just a profoundly detailed framework authored by Professor Tim McGuinness, Ph.D.
Right, an incredible resource.
It really is. He's certified in trauma-informed care, a recoverologist, anthropologist, scientist, polymath, and the director of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, Inc. And he built this incredible guide alongside licensed psychologist Vianney Gonzalez.
Yeah, their combined expertise here is it's vital.
So today we're zeroing in on this phenomenon they call recovery drift, which is it's that twilight zone where you think you're healed enough, but you're actually just stuck.
Yeah. And the crucial thing to understand about recovery drift is that it's almost never a conscious, dramatic choice.
Right. You don't just declare it.
Exactly. You don't wake up one morning and say, I'm done processing my trauma. It's a quiet fade. It happens through passive disengagement. You skip one support group meeting because you're tired.
Or you stop writing in your journal for a few days.
Right. You read one less article about recovery?
Okay, let's unpack this because the sky doesn't immediately fall when you skip those things, right? The absence of effort just, it becomes your new normal.
Yes, exactly.
You've essentially replaced structured healing with the temporary relief of just not thinking about it, which brings us right back to that broken bone analogy.
Yeah.
You're functioning. You're paying your bills, going to work, making dinner.
Right. You look fine.
Yeah. And because you look fine on the outside, it creates this very convincing illusion that you've actually recovered.
But functional survival is not actual resolution. I mean, coping mechanisms, they are brilliant tools for getting through the initial shock of a betrayal. Your brain actually needs them to keep you upright.
Just to survive the day.
Exactly. But when those temporary coping strategies replace the actual structured work of recovery, the unresolved trauma just goes underground. It silently directs your decisions, your anxieties, your relationships from the shadows.
Wow. Yeah, and I see this constantly where people replace the recovery work with sheer busyness. They bury themselves in a project or they start working like 60-hour weeks.
Oh, the overfunctioning trap.
Yes, yes. They become the hyper-competent person who just manages everyone else's problems. And, society applauds that. It looks like incredible resilience. But really, it's a highly sophisticated form of emotional displacement. Like if you never sit still, your brain never has to process what's unfinished.
Spot on. And that displacement is fueled by a really dangerous cultural myth, the idea that time heals all wounds.
Oh, right. We hear that all the time.
We do, but time doesn't process trauma. It doesn't process grief. Time simply masks it. The initial overwhelming intensity of the pain might dull as the months pass, sure. But the underlying psychological disruption, the damage to your trust, your self-image, your ability to feel safe, that remains structurally unchanged until you actively do the work to rebuild it.
But that emotional displacement, it creates a new problem, right? If you completely refuse to sit still, your brain eventually finds another way to force you to pay attention. You move from passive drift to slowly fading out of recovery into active misdirection.
Right, going the wrong way entirely.
Exactly. You start putting a massive amount of energy into the wrong kind of recovery. And a huge one here is anger fixation. Pouring all your energy into chasing justice, tracking down the scammer, or just obsessing over the details of the crime.
And this is where we see survivors get stuck in a loop that feels productive, but is actually totally paralyzing. When your dominant focus becomes the external violation, your internal reconstruction comes to a complete halt.
But wait, hang on. If a criminal systematically manipulates you
Yeah.
and steals your life savings, isn't absolute Bernie fury the healthiest, most natural response you could possibly have? Like, why is leaning into that a bad thing?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the anger itself is entirely justified. I mean, the violation was real, and the anger is a totally natural biological response to a threat. The problem isn't feeling angry. The problem is making anger your primary environment.
Staying in it.
Right. When you spend hours every day tracking the scammer's digital footprint or rereading the fraudulent emails, you are continuously anchoring your nervous system in the past. You're keeping your brain's threat detection system dialed up to a 10. You can't rebuild your internal sense of safety if your focus is entirely fixated on the external threat.
Wow. So it feels like action, but it's actually a tether keeping you tied to the trauma.
Exactly.
There's another trap here that's incredibly deceptive, intellectualizing the trauma. You see survivors who can explain the exact IP spoofing mechanics the scammer used, right? Or the precise psychological scripts they
Yeah,
deployed.
the mechanics of it.
Yeah, they know the anatomy of the scam inside out, but they haven't touched the emotional toll of the betrayal.
Because intellectualization is a brilliant cognitive shield. It allows you to stay engaged with the topic of the scam, giving you a false sense of processing it without ever having to actually feel the agonizing pain of the betrayal.
You're analyzing the weapon, but you're ignoring the wound.
That's a great way to put it. And this naturally leads to another major shield, the trap of validation.
Now, let me challenge this one too, because isn't validation the absolute cornerstone of trauma care? I mean, telling someone, I hear you, your pain is real, this was awful. Isn't that exactly what a traumatized person desperately needs to hear?
In the immediate aftermath, absolutely. Validation is essential for reducing that initial surge of shame, but validation without accountability creates an echo chamber. It creates emotional comfort that ultimately leads to structural weakness.
An echo chamber, right?
Yeah, if you only surround yourself with voices, whether it's friends, family, or certain online groups, that constantly affirm your feelings but never challenge your avoidance behaviors, your growth just stops.
It's like being wrapped in a warm blanket that you can never take off. Like if nobody ever says to you, hey, I notice you're talking in circles about the scammer, instead of discussing how you're actually feeling today, or I see you falling back into this defensive habit, you'll never change the behavior. You're just seeking permission to stay stuck.
Exactly. Accountability introduces the friction required for change.
Right.
Without it, the brain just defaults to its primary directive, which is protection.
Right.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand why we fall into these traps, why we actively resist doing the work, we have to look at the psychological mechanics of avoidance. A scam isn't just a financial loss. It triggers a catastrophic identity collapse.
Yeah. Because if you've spent your entire life believing you're a smart, perceptive, cautious person, realizing you've been deeply deceived,
Yeah.
creates this profound cognitive dissonance. The tension between I am a capable person and I was conned is psychologically unbearable.
It really is.
And to resolve that tension, the mind often resorts to extreme, distorted thinking. You either absorb 100% of the blame, telling yourself you're fundamentally broken and stupid, or you take absolute zero responsibility for your own internal responses, which means you learn nothing about your vulnerabilities.
Right, and both of those extremes protect you from the nuanced, painful truth. Facing the reality of what happened requires acknowledging your own human vulnerability, which triggers an overwhelming wave of shame. Avoidance is simply the brain's way of limiting how much of that terrifying reality you have to process at any given moment.
It's a defense mechanism.
Exactly. But we also have to factor in the physical neuroscience of what the Scars Institute guide calls trauma bond residue.
Oh, this is where it gets really brutal, particularly with relationship scams. Because your logical brain knows, factually, that it was a scam, the person wasn't who they said they were, the entire relationship was a manufactured script, but your nervous system doesn't know that.
Precisely. Your body experienced that affection, that...
You know, if you're listening right now and feeling that shame bubbling up, I want to interrupt that thought right here. Falling for a scam is a human vulnerability that was systematically exploited by professional criminals. It is not a character flaw.
No, not at all.
The manipulation was expertly crafted to hijack your neurochemistry. Understanding your internal response, the dissonance, the trauma bond, the behavioral loops, it isn't about blaming yourself. It's about dismantling the control they left behind. It's how you take your power back.
Reclaiming that power requires you to break the behavioral loop of avoidance.
Yeah.
But, you can't chart a course back to recovery if you don't honestly know where you're starting from. You need a map of the terrain.
And the Scars Institute provides that.
Yes, a very specific sequence for this type of betrayal trauma,
Yeah.
the 5 crises model. You must move through all 5 to reach actual resolution.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break these down, because they don't always look the way you'd expect. The first is the crisis of acceptance. This is the initial shock, the denial, the sheer disbelief. And remember, we assess this by behavior, not just feelings.
Right, behavior is key.
If you tell people you've accepted it, but you're still secretly checking the scammer's social media accounts, or you completely refuse to change your phone number, your behavior shows you are still in the crisis of acceptance.
Action is the only honest metric. Once you genuinely move past acceptance, you enter the second stage, which we touched on earlier, the false calm. And this is arguably the most dangerous paradox in the entire recovery process.
The false calm.
Yeah. The most dangerous moment isn't when you feel the worst, it's when you suddenly feel fine.
Wow. Yeah, because the intense emotional chaos drops. You're sleeping better, you're laughing at jokes again. And the natural conclusion you draw is, I'm good. I survived it. I don't need these support articles or these group meetings anymore.
But you're only in stage 2. You haven't actually processed the deep psychological damage yet. You've just stabilized your vital signs. If you use the false calm to disengage from structured recovery, you are setting yourself up to hit the third stage, the identity crisis, completely unsupported.
And the identity crisis is a monster. This is where the profound psychological toll truly digs its heels in. The initial shock is gone, and now you're left with the agonizing self-doubt. The shame just paralyzes you.
It's all-consuming.
Yeah, you question your own judgment, your worth, your intelligence. You wonder how you can ever trust your own brain again.
It's an internal collapse.
Right.
And often it coincides with or bleeds into the 4th stage, the financial crisis. And, this isn't just about realizing the bank account is empty. This is the delayed, crushing reality of what that lost money actually represents.
It's a survival terror.
Yes. It's mourning the loss of your retirement, your security, or the legacy you wanted to leave your children. The chronic stress of the financial devastation compounds the psychological trauma, making it incredibly difficult to focus on emotional healing when you're terrified about paying rent.
Which culminates in the 5th and final stage, the crisis of faith. We're no longer just talking about the scammer here. This is a total shattering crisis of trust. You lose faith in humanity, you lose faith in institutions, and most devastatingly, you lose faith in yourself.
Exactly.
Getting through this requires a complete, structured reconstruction of how you navigate the world and how you form relationships moving forward.
So if you're looking at this map and you realize exactly where you're stuck, maybe you've been living in the false calm for a year, or you're drowning in the identity crisis and trying to overwork your way out of it, this raises an important question. What is the mechanism for re-entry? How do you actually get moving again?
Well, the very first step of re-entry is absolute radical truth. You have to strip away the protective language. No more saying, I had a rough patch, or things have been stressful. You have to name the exact emotions. I am experiencing profound shame. I am terrified of the future. I am grieving.
Naming it is crucial.
Right. And you have to name the exact avoidance behaviors. I'm working 60 hours a week so I don't have to think about what happened.
Because without that radical truth, any action you take is misdirected. You're trying to navigate a maze while blindfolded. Once you establish the truth of your condition, you have to eliminate the noise. The guide refers to this as stopping too many voices.
Oh, this is such a common stumbling block. You're desperate for help, so you read advice from a dozen different unqualified blogs. You join 5 different informal Facebook groups. You talk to 3 different counselors who don't specialize in scams.
It's overwhelming.
It's like trying to drive a car while 5 different GPS systems shout contradictory directions at you. Turn left. No, U-turn. Go faster. Stop. You end up paralyzed at the intersection. You have to pick one reliable, structured, expert-guided lane, like the Scars Institute, and just stay in it.
That's a great analogy. Conflicting advice is just another sophisticated excuse for avoidance. Once you pick your lane, you have to commit to daily, non-negotiable actions because re-entry into recovery does not begin when you feel ready.
Oof, that is the hardest pill to swallow. We're conditioned to wait for motivation. We tell ourselves, I'll go back to the support community when I feel a little stronger, or I'll start reading the recovery guides when I have more energy.
But the motivation will never arrive while you are stuck in an avoidance loop. The neurochemistry of avoidance actively suppresses motivation. Re-entry begins with behavioral commitment. You act first.
Action precedes feeling.
Exactly. You do the daily reading, you engage with the structured support, you write in your journal, even when you feel incredibly resistant, especially when you feel resistant.
It's the ultimate practical application of fake it till you make it. You aren't faking your emotions, you're faking the momentum. You commit to the physical behavior of recovery, and your emotional alignment, your neurochemistry, will eventually catch up. Recovery is not about perfection. It is not about speed. It is entirely about direction and consistency.
Consistency transforms small, forced actions into genuine, measurable progress. You interrupt the old pattern of avoidance by choosing to engage just for today, and then you wake up and make that exact same choice tomorrow.
So what does this all mean? If we pull all of this together, recovery drift is a deeply normal biological response to overwhelming trauma. It happens to almost everyone. But staying in the drift is a choice.
Yes, a choice you have power over.
Returning to the path requires radical truth about your own behaviors. It requires embracing the friction of accountability over the warm blanket of validation. And it requires accepting structured guidance.
I want to leave you with the final thought to consider as we close today. If you've been running from the difficult emotions of your recovery, what if the discomfort, the fear, and the friction you feel aren't signs that you are failing? What if that discomfort is actually the exact compass pointing you toward true, lasting freedom? What if leaning into the friction is the only way to generate the spark you need to heal?
Wow, that's a profound reframe. If you're listening right now and you realize you've been relying on painkillers instead of setting the bone, it's time to put the cast back on. It's time to do the structural work.
It really is.
And we are going to end this exactly as we began, with a serious, unwavering reminder to all scam victims and survivors listening. It was not your fault, and you are not alone.
You're not alone.
We invite all scam victims or survivors to join the Scars Institute Survivors community for support and their recovery. Remind yourself that it is free, safe, and completely confidential. You can sign up right now at www.scarscommunity.org. And for you to learn what you need to know now, visit www.scamvictimsupport.org. Thank you for joining the Scars Institute Exploration Podcast.
Thank you for listening to our Scars Institute Audio Exploration Podcast. Remember that this was not your fault, and you are not alone. But right now, there are things you need to know. Start by visiting www.scamvictimsupport.org. This will help you learn the basics that every scam victim and survivor needs to know now. We are here for you. We have created a free, safe, and confidential space just for you. You can learn and recover in the Scars Institute's Scam Survivors Support and Recovery community. To sign up, please visit www.scarscommunity.org. Answer a few questions to help us better support you and begin your recovery. This has been another in the Scars Institute Audio Exploration Podcast series. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe. We wish you all the best, and remember that the Scars Institute is here to help. This podcast is copyright 2026 by the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, Inc.